The Green Sheet is a financial publication of the MWRA Advisory Board. The June installment presents the financial impacts of the Advisory Board's comments and recommendations for the fiscal year 15 CEB and CIP, which can be separated into two categories: those impacting the fiscal year 15 rate revenue requirement and those aimed at future years' rates. For a quick look at the big picture, this chart presents the projected rate assessment increases between now and fiscal year 20. The authority's proposed fiscal year 15 increase is 3.57%, and the Advisory Board is recommending an approach to lower the increase to 3.43%. With fiscal year 15, it's now been 6 consecutive years that rate assessment increases have been kept below 4%, which is the basis for the Advisory Board's mantra, "for no more," meaning no more rate assessment increases over 4% from year to year. Currently, fiscal year 16 through 20 all project to be over 4%, with fiscal year 17 the biggest immediate hurdle. At over 60% of the authority's total expenditures, debt service on capital projects is the driving factor behind the rate assessment increases just discussed, which ties into the Advisory Board's recommendation for lowering the rate revenue requirement through the use of debt service assistance, which is funding from the state to partially offset debt service on court-mandated projects. This chart shows the history of debt service assistance from the state, which peaked in 2001 at over $51 million before falling to zero in 2003. DSA rebounded between 2004 and 2008 before again dropping off, and this volatility has made budgeting DSA impossible for the authority. But the $853,000 received in fiscal year 14 represents the most DSA received since 2008, indicating an effort in the legislature to provide relief to ratepayers. Therefore, the Advisory Board is introducing a policy recommendation aptly named Pay It Forward, meaning that any DSA received from the Commonwealth will be automatically applied to the following fiscal year, reducing the rate assessments to the communities and their residents. By applying this concept in fiscal year 15, the increase drops to 3.43%. This strategy also gives legislators a concrete idea of how DSA will benefit their constituents, the ratepayers. This brings us to the second main focus of the comments and recommendations, the future, namely fiscal year 17. The proposed fiscal year 15 budget calls for the use of $7.8 million in rate stabilization, representing a fifth of those monies, which is why the Advisory Board recommends backing out all reductions of the proposed fiscal year 15 budget from the use of rate stabilization, preserving those monies for fiscal year 17. These budget recommendations are twofold, starting first with anticipated adjustments. These budget reductions come from refining the budget between when it's proposed and when it's adopted. These adjustments are expected to affect division budgets, fringe benefits, watershed reimbursements, and changes to the Advisory Board's budget since first proposed. Finally, the planned defeasance transaction, targeted at fiscal year 17, has been adjusted and will save an additional $500,000 in fiscal year 15. These changes total $790,000. As a quick reminder, defeasance is the prepayment of debt service, and the defeasance of applicable bonds will save a total of $1.3 million in fiscal year 15. The biggest impact by design is in fiscal year 17, showing that the defeasance account strategy is unquestionably working as intended. Following the anticipated adjustments are the specific reductions that the Advisory Board has outlined in the Comments and Recommendations document, now available online. These are broken into two categories. First are the changes to budget assumptions. The Advisory Board recommends not assuming impacts of a new NIPDES permit on chemical use at the Deer Island Treatment Plant. Tied to this is the timing of the local limit study, which the Advisory Board recommends pushing back. The Advisory Board also assumes that staffing vacancy rates can be adjusted based on how long it historically takes to fill positions. Finally, reducing the assumed output from Fall River by 1 ton per day is in line with historical averages. The next set of recommendations would be removed from the fiscal year 15 budget, including the capitalization of lab equipment based on the capitalization policy already in place. Finally, the Advisory Board questions the need for the Deer Island beach erosion study to be done annually. All these recommendations total over $1.3 million, which when combined with the anticipated adjustments previously discussed, are over $2 million. Factoring in the operating reserve requirement, which calls for 1/6 of the operating budget, this is an additional $264,000. The final recommended budget reduction is $2.4 million. To review, the Advisory Board recommendations are two-part. First is to reduce the fiscal year 15 rate revenue requirement by paying forward debt service assistance. Second is to back out the $2.4 million reduction just discussed from the use of rate stabilization so that it can be preserved for the most challenging year on the immediate horizon, fiscal year 17. To be clear, this isn't saving money just in case it's needed. Every year a multi-year projection is done during the budget process to identify future challenges, and it's important to look at the historical progression to see how much has been accomplished. The fiscal year 16 rate increase was projected at 6.6% 2 years ago and is currently projected at 4.3%. The fiscal year 17 rate increase was projected at 8.9% 2 years ago, which was whittled to 8.5%, and then with a significant defeasance, the projected rate assessment increase was dropped to 6% in the proposed fiscal year 15 budget. With an even greater defeasance, that projection now sits at 5.1%, but with the $2.4 million budget reduction recommended by the advisory board and applied to fiscal year 17, the projected fiscal year 17 rate assessment increase drops below 5%, making the goal of 4 no more suddenly very attainable, especially if debt service assistance is able to make a comeback in the legislature in the next 2 years. To get a complete copy of the advisory board's comments and recommendations, visit our website or feel free to email us with any specific questions.